Annie.
Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We're about to get started today with our Media Advocacy, Social Media for Advocacy webinar series. I am Stephanie Vaughn. I am the Senior Marketing Manager with Voices for Healthy Kids. Before we jump in, we just needed to get through a few housekeeping rules for today. First of all, this call is being recorded for future playback, so if you miss anything, you'll have a recording to go back to. If you've been following our training series, we have now moved into the Media Advocacy section of the Power Prism for the next 4 webinar series trainings. We will be talking about social media for advocacy, and these 4 trainings are designed to be a series, so we look forward to chatting with you over the next month or so. All lines are muted, but we will be actively monitoring the chat function. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we will get to them. So just to kind of give you a preview of what's next in the series, the next 3 trainings are listed. If you have not registered for these, please do. Please watch your email following this training and you'll be able to see the links for those. You won't want to miss the 4th part where we will have some hands-on practice and a chance to have your campaign questions answered in this really cool Skills Lab format. So definitely check that out. So with that, let's jump in and get going. I want to introduce you to Rihanna Kern. She is the Media Advocacy Manager for the American Heart Association Advocacy Team.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. I'm really excited to be talking with you all today in part 1 of the 4-part series on social media for advocacy. So I'm just going to quickly walk you guys through the agenda for what you're going to hear from me over the next half hour or so. So our first topic area will be how to assess your organization's social media presence. Are you in the right place? Are you talking to the right people? The second part will be the basics of each of the major social media platforms and how you can effectively use them for advocacy. And then the third part will be maintaining your social media pages effectively when you're wearing many hats. So in that section, we'll talk about some free or low-cost resources that make your life easier as a social media manager with many other things on your plate. So while today we're going to be focusing on social media, it's important that we take a look at the overarching strategy that social media as a tactic fits into, and that's called media advocacy. So I know each of you may have some different levels of experience with and understanding of what media advocacy is. So we're going to be starting with the basics. What is media advocacy? So here it is. Media advocacy is the strategic use of mass media to support community organizing to advance social or public policy initiatives. And we'll come back to this formal definition throughout our discussion. But as we move along, I just want you to keep in mind those 3 key phrases that are bolded there. So strategic use of media, supporting community organizing, and then advancing policy. So that's great and all, but what is the purpose of media advocacy? The purpose of using mass media strategically to support organizing for policy initiatives. And what it comes down to is that the purpose of that strategic use of media is to put pressure on policymakers.
Sorry, Rihanna, you got muted. If you could unmute yourself real quick. It was, I did something manually, so you just do it on Zoom.
Okay.
Thank you. I can hear you. My bad.
No, I'll start from the top of this slide. Did you guys lose me on the last one?
This slide, if you could start here, that'd be great.
Okay, great. So the purpose of media advocacy, that strategic use of media, is to put pressure on policymakers by mobilizing the community groups they serve or represent and improve news coverage of the policy issues. And this isn't an attempt to overhaul the mass media, but rather to change specific policies that influence health or whatever policies it is that we're seeking to change. And I know all of you joining this webinar today or watching in the future come from some different communities of different sizes. So we're going to start by thinking about where you get the news that matters to you. And then later we'll have time to brainstorm on some ways you can get your message out through channels that matter to your decision makers, who have, of course, their own news places that matter to them. So feel free to drop into the chat. You're going to want to change the drop down from all panelists to all panelists and participants. Some of the ways that you get the news that matters to you. And that could be social media. It could be a specific place like Facebook or Twitter. Maybe it's the newspaper or next door, but feel free to drop some ideas in there of where you're thinking of the influence for you comes from. And while you're doing that, we're just going to talk about what it really means for media advocacy to be strategic. So unlike other forms of health communications, media advocacy focuses primarily on those environmental context pieces for health outcomes, and it looks to policy as the mechanism for changing that context. So most health communicators are targeting individuals with information on what they can do to avoid illness or injury or treat a problem that they already have. So the example I'll just use here is when we talk about tobacco use. When we're talking about problems and the health impacts of smoking, how do we fix that problem? You encourage individuals to quit smoking, we promote quit line services, we promote support groups, and other types of individual behavior change. But on the other hand, when we talk about the negative health impacts of tobacco, how do you change that conversation? Who becomes responsible when we say the health impacts of tobacco versus tobacco use? That really switches the framework from the individual to the tobacco industry, the FDA, and then it becomes this public health issue. So when we're focusing our media advocacy efforts to be strategic, we have to be using the focus of adjusting from that individual behavior change framework that many of us think in, to target policymakers and those who can be mobilized to influence them to talk about the controls of the environment that those policymakers and decision makers have a handle on. So it seems like a minor shift in framing, but it really makes a huge difference in moving individual responsibility to the need for public policy change. So now we're going to get into what you all came here for. So how does social media support media advocacy? And really, social media and online tactics have a long-lasting footprint that can help you build your credibility as an advocate or an advocacy organization to advance the policies that you care about for a long time. So when we think about social media, it's the latest place, if you will, that people gather to share their lives and the things that impact them with the people who they know. So creating awareness and connecting the dots online for people is a very powerful grassroots tool that we need to be using. It's important to keep in mind that your message may vary with who you're talking to. So are you talking with parents to get them involved in advocating for an increase in Head Start funding? Are you trying to convince a decision maker that this type of funding increase is important? All of these questions can help us look at assessing your social media presence and answer the question, are you in the right place for the people you're talking to? So before you can know if you're in that right place, you need to answer some of these basic questions. They may seem simple, but this is really the core of your strategy, and having them written out somewhere can help you consider if what you're doing is strategic, or maybe it's a little scattered for what it is that you need to accomplish. And this is also going to be the basis of our next conversation in the series about campaign planning, so you'll want to tuck these ideas away in your mind. But first, the things you have to know: what do you want to change? Is it a policy? Is it that you need sidewalks? Is it that you need to change the way that kids are getting to the school or the way that children are being fed? All of those things, whatever it is that you need to change, you need to know what is happening now and what you want to happen next. With that comes, what is the solution or the policy that you're proposing to cause that change? The next piece, who has the power to make that change? Is this a regulatory change? Is it a legislative change? Is it something that is a little more fluid? There's a few different people who get to be involved in it. Who must be mobilized to apply the necessary pressure? And that's what we'll talk about on the next slide. That's really your audience of who has the ear of the decision maker. And the last piece there, what do the targets that you've identified need to hear? So what is going to be the convincing message for them that could cause them to be on your side or not on your side? So this slide, like I said, looks very similar to the one we just looked at, but the key difference here is that we're shifting from the power players we identified and the overarching campaign and closer to the people who we're already talking to or need to be talking to. So we'll get more into engaging with our audiences on the third part of this series about community management, but I do want to talk about a couple of things that we need to make sure we consider when we're building our messages on social media to engage with different audiences on the platforms available to us. So these questions you'll want to answer: who is your audience? Why are you talking to them? What common ground do you share with your audience? Sometimes this may be that you are a group working with parents, and the common ground you share is that these parental relationships, or it may be that you all are focused on food security or some other piece that you can look at and say, I see myself in you. And then that last one is really the core of the social media conversation, but what is a story you can tell that will capture them? What is going to be that thumb-stopping story piece that you can put out onto your social media that will have an impact in your advocacy? So how can I use social media to support my advocacy work? Social media is a tactic that supports a very robust media advocacy strategy. So we're going to discuss some of the major social media platforms and how to build on your successes to leverage those platforms for meaningful change. And when I say successes, I don't mean the end goal where we have a policy change. That's not when you're going to want to start getting involved, but the successes even of building up conversations, of building up a community, of having that first step conversation and all coming together to decide what the change is. Success can be small, and social media celebrates successes of all sizes with relatively similar levels of engagement. So you'll want to be thinking about that as you go. First, I just want to ask a quick question. I want you guys to type in the chat which social media platform you think has the most users in the US. And I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that one. I'll see if anything starts filtering in. I'm seeing everyone now's media pieces. I see Facebook, Twitter, a couple more Facebook. I'll do the big reveal. It's actually YouTube. Now, it might surprise you, but almost 3/4 of all American adults are using YouTube. And I see that many of you guessed Facebook. It's actually the second most used social media platform with just under 70% of all American adults using the platform. And interestingly, almost all of those who are using it logging in at least once a day. So those are fun stats to know. I recommend you surprise someone else in your life with them today. But what's really important for social media advocacy is that we need to look at the messages we're developing to know who we're trying to reach and where they are online. So just a couple more stats here. Less than 1/4 of adults are using Twitter, and almost 2/3 of them are men globally. Just about half of all Americans who are making over $75,000 a year or who have a postgraduate degree are using LinkedIn. If you're looking for people under 25, almost 3/4 of them are using Snapchat. So the differences in audience between social media platforms are significant. And the effort and the messages you need to be using in each place should be relevant for the success that you want to achieve in your advocacy. So there's a couple of additional demographics that we'll be looking at in this slide deck on a few major platforms that you can refer to when you're making those decisions about, am I in the right place for the people I'm trying to reach? So each of the major platforms I'm going to walk through today, which will be Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I have a quick slide on YouTube as well, is going to have a basic demographic slide like this one, but I don't want to linger for too long because it's not very compelling to look at these bullet points, but I think it's important for us to level set on the analytics that you have access to as a social media user. So one of the markers for our takeaways for this webinar is if you're in the right place for who you want to be talking to. So here on Facebook, as you can see, all of the different age groups are represented relatively robustly, with most users being between, or the largest section of users being 25 to 30 years old, 84% there. Interestingly, 46% of 65 plus year olds in the US are using Facebook. And then when we look at the urban, suburban, and rural demographic breakdowns, it's not too distant from each other, with only, about 13 points spread there between urban, rural, and suburban use. And this Sprout social link that I have, I think we'll be sharing the recording for this presentation afterwards. This is a regularly updated resource I recommend you take a look at, especially before you jump in on a campaign where you might be talking to a new audience, so that you can be thinking about who is it that I'm most likely to be reaching on this page. So now talking specifically about the basics of advocacy and how you can advocate, the basics of Facebook and how you can advocate on it. So Facebook is a very one-to-one platform. And by that, I mean that your identity is most often signed with one Facebook page. So other places like Twitter or even Instagram, people may run multiple profiles that they identify as themselves, but Facebook is most often an individual's whole entity is on one page. So when you're thinking about that, what you want to be doing in advocacy is making it personal. So showing it's a challenge, right? Because I just talked about that environmental context, and we don't want to be focusing on individual behavior, but you can make an environmental context argument personal by using stories. So on the right here, you see a screen cap from a video that was run by the American Heart Association's Kansas team about Medicaid, the Medicaid gap. And in this screenshot, you'll see, and this goes right to our second point here, visuals are essential and captions are a must. So this is a frozen picture. You're not watching the video with me here, but you can see what's going on. This is obviously a quote from the advocate saying, "I fall in the Medicaid gap and can't afford insurance." So when you're talking online and doing advocacy online, you need to be very compelling, no matter when somebody might be falling on your content. And by that, I mean captions and call outs for stats or anything you can be doing that upgrades your typical image you might find on Facebook into something that is more interesting or more surprising is going to have the biggest impact. Another key piece here for advocacy on Facebook is that you need to be using links. Number one, you always want to have that call to action. Facebook is a place where people are ready to jump off into other platforms. So typically, even if you're using Facebook on your phone, the app is set up to very easily allow you to travel between new pages and back to the app. So link out to the things that you want people to do. Use a link preview whenever you can. And by that, I mean when you're pasting in your post or you're typing your post into Facebook, the more real estate that you give for something to be clicked on, the more likely it's going to be clicked on. So in the screenshot that you see here, the image, the piece below that's a little bit lighter gray, as well as that Learn More button, all of that is clickable. So that just increases your chances of getting an action. And this last one here, it may seem a little technical for an overview, I know, but if there's anything you do, if there's anything you do right after this presentation, please add a Facebook pixel to your website. You never know when the funds might be available for you to run Facebook ads. You never know when that moment is going to strike, but if you put the pixel on your website today, and what that is just a tracking cookie, if you're familiar with that term, that will mark who is visiting your website and therefore who's an interested audience, and then put them all together into a space in Facebook's ad manager to allow you to retarget them with advertisements in the future. So it's a really easy way to know that you're reaching that audience that you want to be reaching without having to go through all the demographic data. You're literally finding those exact people.
Hey, Rihanna, we actually have a couple of questions in the chat box. So when you are saying captions are a must, do you mean captions on the graphic of the text that goes with the photo or video?
You know, it's a good question. I think whenever you have the ability to be typing or adding more information on a social media platform, you should always be adding it. So you do want to add graphic or captions to the photo or video that go along with it. But in addition to that, on the actual videos themselves, like you see here, on the actual graphics themselves, adding some sort of text that might frame what it is that you're talking about is a good practice. And very recently, Facebook, if you're running ads specifically, Facebook changed its rules to say that you can add as much text as you want to an image. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily, but it does mean that you won't be taken down or deprioritized in the algorithm for doing it.
Okay, and another question. So talking about pixels, how do you see all the info that the pixel tracks?
So once you add a pixel to your website, that's linked up with your ad manager in Facebook. So you'll need to visit the ad management section of Facebook, and that's in the top right when you drop down to your page. There should be a business manager section or tab that you have available to you, and that will pull up there. Admittedly, when you're in it, it doesn't show you much that's very actionable for you or I to read. So you're not getting names and phone numbers and email addresses by any means. It's very much the technical piece that Facebook does for tracking people. And when I say tracking people, I just mean recording who it is that's on your website and then placing them into a custom audience in the Facebook ad manager. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, and one last question about Facebook. So have you heard anything about the Facebook algorithm not promoting images that have a lot of text?
Oh, that's exactly what I was just talking about. So Facebook just changed its rules. I want to say I saw the blog maybe a week ago, if not even that long. They used to have a rule where if your image had more than 20% of the space taken up by text, it was automatically getting flagged for deprioritization, especially in the ads manager. You wouldn't even be allowed to post. The recent change for that, I'm not sure exactly what prompted it, but they did change that feature, I think likely due to the resurgence of infographic type images. A lot of people are sharing those more recently, and they were being deprioritized even though they were very informative and engaging. So I think that might be a sign for us of where the platform is going next. Feel free to let me know if there's any more questions on Facebook, but now I'm going to move on to talking very briefly about Twitter. So again, here are just some big quick stats. The highlight here I want you to see is the very distinct lack of users who are over 65. So you might remember from the Facebook slide that that percentage was 46%. So this is a much younger audience you're seeing on Twitter. I think that all of us recognize that the demographics of those who are on Twitter are definitely lean urban, they lean younger. The types of accounts you see on Twitter are more likely to be these branded accounts. So if you are following the Voices for Healthy Kids Twitter account, you'll notice that that has the brand as the picture, and you're talking really directly to the organization. You're not talking to an individual. So it's less of a one-to-one platform and a lot more of a space where, as an organization, you can be entering the conversation with people as a group in a way that you can't always be doing on Facebook. So here, some important things to think about when you're doing advocacy on Twitter. And here I just have a screenshot of an Americans for the Arts post that I thought might be interesting for us to consider. But on Twitter, the things you need to be in order to be successful with advocacy are timely, creative, or unique. If what you're posting is none of those things, then most likely it's not going to get you very far. And that might be harsh, as sometimes it's tough to look at your own content and think this isn't timely, it's not creative, and it isn't unique. But oftentimes we need to be careful about what we're saying so that the things we say have more value. So keep things relevant. If you go out and have a meeting on the Hill, for example, you see in this photo from the Americans for the Arts, this picture was taken outside of a Hill office. Admittedly, there's not too much going on here, just two people smiling outside of an office, but they did post right away on the day. They talked about what they did, they talked about what their ask is, and then they provided a link with a preview. So this one is a good example for how to convert something that you may not think of as super interesting, like a meeting, into a compelling piece of social media content around advocacy. The other piece here, of course, Twitter has limits on it, so you can't get too long like you could on Facebook, but keep things short and keep them actionable. It's not bad for you to say what it is you want someone to do. So you see in this example, they say, read the testimony. You could say, sign our petition, take action, join us. Those types of words are very common on the advocacy side of Twitter, and it's not a scenario where you're asking, where it seems weird for you to ask people what to do. People like direction, especially on Twitter. Somebody wants to know what it is that you are looking for out of sharing. A key piece here that I want to bring up, and it's very different on Twitter than it is on Instagram, but you need to use your hashtags very strategically, especially for advocacy. You don't want to have a ton of clickables. So in the example here, anything that's blue is considered a clickable. The hashtags that you're posting, you don't want to do 2 in a row. You don't want to do anything that doesn't add value or doesn't add an interesting piece of the conversation to what you're talking about. And the real reason for that is that hashtags are more of an aggregation tool than they are a piece of content. So when you are using a hashtag, what you're trying to say is, I want to be in the conversation with all the other pieces of content that are available inside of this hashtag. So if you're using something that's not very unique, like for example, you wouldn't use hashtag art, A-R-T. You wouldn't use hashtag advocacy. It's not creative or unique. It's not really adding much to what you're doing. But if you have a branded hashtag, or if you have a specific ask that you are constantly talking about, it's good to have a strategy around, okay, every time we're talking about, I'm thinking, for example, hashtag boost SNAP. That's one that a lot of nutrition and food security groups are using in building a conversation around why SNAP funding should be boosted. So that's what I would consider a strategic advocacy hashtag and a good use of Twitter for advocacy. And the last one here, it may be intimidating, but I'm here to tell you, I'll look you right in the eye, tag lawmakers, tag decision makers. If they're on Twitter, you can hold them accountable. And it's scary, right? It seems like, oh, is it right for us to be reaching directly out and saying, this is what we want you to do? But I promise if any social media platform is welcome for it, it's Twitter. So don't be afraid to directly engage in those conversations, especially if you're trying to get someone's attention that you haven't had before. If you're trying to thank them for an action they've taken or appreciate what work they have been doing, all of those connection points are important, and on Twitter they have a high level of currency. I don't know if I saw maybe something coming in on the chat. Oh, I don't think so. Okay. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about Instagram. As a social media person for the American Heart Association, I get asked about Instagram all the time. So people are saying, should we post this on Instagram? Is this something that people are going to care about there? How can we make sure that the people who are on Instagram know what we're talking about on our Instagram? And I know what we're looking at right here are some of the demographics, but what I want to point out is that, again, this is a platform that skews younger. For what it's worth, the growth of Instagram has been pretty significant. I think even during COVID, we've seen an increase in people who are using Instagram regularly. So on that first slide, we talked about people who are on Facebook are logging on every single day. I think it was 74% of them are doing that. So Instagram is another platform where people are spending time, and they're going there multiple times a day. So don't discount it, but what we're going to talk about on this next slide are some of the things you need to keep in mind for if you can really have a presence that's robust and serving your media advocacy needs. And again, we want to think about what we talked about earlier. So how is it that we're organizing people to strategically talk to decision makers to achieve our public policy goals? So a little bit briefly about the way that Instagram works. It's a very visual, and by very, I mean it is an exclusively visuals first platform. So on Facebook or on Twitter, you can post something without including a photo or a video. That doesn't mean necessarily that you should, but you can. On Instagram, that's not an option. So you always need an image in order to be communicating with your Instagram audience. The other thing that really differentiates Instagram, especially for the point of advocacy, is that most of the platform is not clickable. So the only place that you have the opportunity to really direct people towards a one-click type action is in the bio, which is the profile page of your Instagram account. So on Facebook or on Twitter, at the end of your post, I was telling you link previews are important. The more clickable space you have, the more likely you are to get an action. But it's very different on Instagram, where you don't have the ability to include a URL in the caption and drive someone to action just from the language that you've posted. The other thing to think about is that Instagram requires the most curation. So on Twitter, your post lasts, if we think about the lifespan of a social media post, your Twitter post has a lifespan of maybe 3 or 4 hours. And that doesn't mean that it disappears, but it does mean that it doesn't continue being showed to your followers. So the time of day or the frequency with which you're posting is something that you can experiment with in your advocacy work to see when it is that people are taking action, how often you can post in a day before people are noticing or not noticing. On Instagram, it's a little bit different. So there's 3 different key places you can be posting. The first one is the grid or a profile post. That's what you see here, and this is an example from the Sierra Club about Bike Month. But this is a grid post, meaning that it lives on the profile of the page the whole time after it posts. The second place is Instagram stories. So those are the ones that expire after 24 hours. The emphasis there is often on video, vertical content, so straight up and down, and on things that are a little more timely. And then the last place, and really I guess there's 4 places now because Instagram Reels exists, which is the response for TikTok. But the one that I'll focus on, because I think it's important for advocacy, is Instagram TV. So that's a separate feed, but one that lives forever on your Instagram page, where you can post videos that are over 60 seconds and I think up to 1 hour long. So the content that you're sharing on Facebook and on Twitter, if you have some great compelling advocacy work, that can still live on in your Instagram page in that Instagram TV space. So you have a lot of options available to you on this platform, but admittedly, I think when you're thinking about how your media advocacy strategy and using social media for it works, you may not be able to leverage decision makers in the same way on Instagram that you might be able to on Facebook and Twitter, where they're more likely to have accounts. The other piece I just want to mention on Instagram is that a lot of your following or a lot of the content that you'll be building, the spread for that comes from other people sharing it. So on Facebook and on Twitter, the spread kind of comes from people seeing you in their feed. On Instagram, it's more often that the people who follow you are the ones who are sharing out your content on your behalf. So if you post something to your grid, like this Instagram post here from the Sierra Club, the little airplane icon, if one of your followers were to see that, and this is your own post, they can post your picture to their Instagram story, and that's where a lot of your new traffic comes in from. And I think if any of you are on the platform, you've been seeing that growing and that space becoming more interesting in advocacy. So I think I've seen a couple chats come in. I don't know if there's any questions on Instagram specifically we can talk about.
Yeah, Rihanna, question. Is there an Instagram pixel?
So Instagram is owned by Facebook. So if you add the Facebook pixel, then you can use that audience again on Instagram.
Also, just jumping back in, we had a question back at Twitter about tagging decision makers. Could you give us like a quick example of a successful post that you've had where you've tagged a decision maker?
Sure. So I think the two common instances where you might be tagging a decision maker is either that you're asking them to do something or you're recognizing that they did it or didn't do it. You don't want to tag them necessarily in everyday types of posts, but for example, if a city council member is on Twitter and they're talking about how they'll be looking forward to the community discussion that's happening this evening, as an organization, you can post and say, hey, at decision maker XYZ, we're really hoping to hear that you are supporting our initiative around bike and pedestrian funding, and then using your advocacy hashtag. And then oftentimes with local decision makers, they're the ones who are running their own pages. So number one, they get a notification that has your name in it. They click on that, they might be able to click through to the hashtag and see what types of conversations are going on. And of course, we don't use social media as the be-all, end-all of our communication strategies. So we want to make sure that we're also doing the setting up meetings and sending emails and all of that. But it's just another reminder for that lawmaker that you're keeping an eye on what they're doing and you're hoping that they will, that they're listening. I hope that helps. Okay, and I just wanted to talk here briefly about YouTube since I brought it up at the beginning of the conversation. This is a look at the audiences here, and I'm not going to focus a ton on how to do advocacy on YouTube, but essentially if you're creating videos for other platforms, you should use YouTube as your upload space for those. There's other options like Vimeo, and I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but YouTube has a great audience, and the algorithm for YouTube is to constantly be feeding people related content. So uploading the videos that you're making and typing a description in about what you're talking about can help you build a very passive audience in a way that is very different than other social media platforms. So with that, we just got through our second section of the piece, and I just want to address here the last section of maintaining your social media pages effectively when you're wearing a lot of hats. So what we are going to talk about, and I just have a couple more slides, is how you can incorporate social media into your existing work. I talked about this at the top of our conversation, but the biggest thing you can be doing is use your social media to amplify your success. So you know where your audience is. Let's say you've gone through all the planning You figured out where the people are. You have a profile there. You're already posting, and then you're ready to engage. So the best thing you can do is talk about what you're doing. Don't assume that your audience knows anything. And that might be hard. I think sometimes when we're writing newsletters, we're thinking about this narrative that we're building up over time. On social media, you can almost always assume that you're starting from square one and that you can talk about your success from that very basic space of, if you didn't know anything about this before, but you care about what we care about, you can also celebrate with us what we're celebrating. So, oops. Some examples of that are share articles that are about the work that you're doing, especially if you are working on media advocacy from the point of view of op-eds or letters to the editor, or even talking with journalists about the things that you're working on. Sharing those articles is a great way to make sure that everyone knows that the work you're doing is being recognized, and it also builds up your profile in a way that adds credibility. The next thing is that you can tag those key decision makers in your posts. So let's say that a vote that you were really working hard on went through, and now you're very excited that we're at the next steps. Tag the decision makers who helped you get there, and the next ones along the way to say, we're here, we're working, and we want to keep doing what we're doing with you. And the way that this can really fit into your everyday work is that if you know that this, you'll of course know when these votes and when these things are happening because you'll be involved in that work. So all you have to do is just share what's happening as it's happening. Everything doesn't have to be perfectly curated. Timeliness, I think, takes priority over even perfect grammar in the world of advocacy. And the next thing here is just think about the visuals. So this is more about how you can set yourself up for success to make sure if you're wearing a lot of hats in your organization, that when you're ready, something just happened, that you can go right ahead and start posting on social media without having to put too much together to make it work. So something you should always think about, you're always competing for attention online. So your posts have to be visually appealing. I call these VIPs, so visually interesting post. If you are being surrounded, your posts are going to be surrounded by dogs who are water skiing and who knows what else is happening in the news. You need to have something that differentiates yourself and your posts to get people to stop their thumbs as they're scrolling. So these points here, we just have a couple. You can create your own. The next page that I'll move to is some resources that are free or low cost for creating your images. A great tip I love to give to people who are starting out on advocacy is compile some go-to images now. Every second that you have for planning, you want to get a desktop folder or a Google Drive folder or something that's called photos, images, whatever you can pull up quickly. And then within that, add some folders of movement images. So you don't have to be a graphic designer or a photographer, but if you know that there is a great shot from a rally that you guys put together, add that into a folder called groups or rally, or the topic areas you're always talking about, compile those photos ahead of time, put them into these folders as they come up. So after an event, you might want to have as your post-event checklist something like copy great pictures into our images folder so that when a win comes, you are not scrambling through your iPhone drive or through the Google email, all of the Gmails that you have to find that great picture. And you can just attach something that's relevant, visually interesting to whatever very timely content you're talking about and go from there. So thank you guys so much for this. Here I have a resources slide that you're going to want to take a look at. These are just some of the social media channels you can be thinking about that are important for using advocacy, and then some of the free social media tools that I recommend you take a look at for setting up your advocacy channels. So I'll leave this up. The next slide was just one about questions, but if there's anything else you want to ask, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I think we have a couple minutes left.
Hey, thanks, Rihanna. We are actually out of time, so if you have questions, please bring them to our next training on October 14th, where we're going to be diving in on how to apply social media to your campaigns. If you need any help with that registration, please do reach out to the Voices for Healthy Kids team. We can help you with that. Also, we'd appreciate it if you would take a couple minutes to take a short evaluation after this webinar. The link is in the chat box right now. So thanks again for tuning in today, everyone. We will see you on the 14th for our next session. Thanks.
Thanks.